It happened. Exactly what everybody thought was going to happen, happened. What a surprise. But it's somehow way worse than what we thought would happen. The day before has now come out, flopped terribly. The company shut down, and very shortly after shutting down, they also removed the game from Steam due to the overwhelming amount of fees that they have to cover due to lawsuits and other things. So how did this happen? And like, what can we learn from it? Because I initially didn't want to talk about this. There's so many people who have already talked about it, but I've been following this for a really long time. I was put onto this by KiraTV originally, a fantastic creator that does a lot of variety stuff nowadays, but especially back in the day used to cover primarily asset flips and just scammers in the gaming sector. And I think a lot of what's going on here is fascinating. So FNTASTIC, the company that made this, was always a very shady company, and we now know from like the books that it was even more shady than we thought. It allegedly had 100 full-time employees, but spread across the entire world. They were from a year that they weren't actually incorporated or founded. They did the whole prop night situation. That's a whole story, especially things like the trademarking of the day before as a name, that they didn't have it trademarked when they announced the name and then had to fight for the trademark. Although I did see a lot of people that they thought it kind of legitimized the company, the fact that they got the trademark in the end. And of course, the existence of volunteers, which were fans, like super fans, that because they were such fans of this in development game, they got the opportunity not only to beta test it, but to actually participate in development. We understand by adding parts of code or programming or assets or what be it, but in an unpaid fashion, except they did say that sometimes some volunteers were paid. So, okay, that's not shady at all. I mean, the writing was on the wall on this one, let's be honest. But now that it's released, it's even worse. Now that people have actually gotten their hands on it, there is a fantastic post by Epic Story 1989 on Reddit. Also cites a paste bin by XX Austin James, gotta give credit where it's due, that just lists all of the assets that are just pre-bought assets and sometimes tweaked and sometimes not very tweaked that got put into this game, that I think, for my money, it qualifies it very much as an asset flip, which is not bad. Like, let's be clear here. If you buy assets on a store and then you do a lot of transformative things with it and you build out a good game, that's fine. But the reality is that a lot of games, like I said with KiraTV back in the day, a lot of asset flip games feel like asset flip games. It's just something that you kind of have to experience to really notice, because sometimes they don't even look like asset flips, but they are. I've said it a million times. If there's money to be made, people will find a scummy way to make that money. So nowhere is safe. But what really interests me, the thing that I really want to talk about, is not only just how bad the game is, because let's be honest, there is an argument that exists that the reason the day before flopped is not because it's a terrible game, but because it's not the game that was marketed. It was marketed as an MMO survival game, and what came out was a kind of a Frankenstein version of just an extraction shooter with zombies. But it's not just that. It's that the game that finally came out, as it is, would be a game that you would pay $4.99 for and feel ripped off. So it's just a bad game. There was work put into it. There were assets bought. They were more or less implemented into a game. There was, from what we see, there was more or less network play in the game, which is not that easy to do. It's a one step above just like putting a bunch of assets in a box and selling it on the Steam store, right? Like there was stuff in the game, but it just wasn't good. It doesn't matter what your expectations were. If you knew nothing about the game and bought it, you would feel like it was a scam. But the reason that it was such a big deal, and it's not just another drop in the scam bucket that we have consistently seen and that still happen day after day, not only on Steam, but on the PlayStation Store. I'm sure that on the Xbox Store, it happens as well, is because of what was promised was actually a compelling game to so many people. The idea that exists behind the day before is something that people want, and that is why it garnered the attention that it did. I hate to say anything positive about this thing because it's really just scammers ended up getting what they deserve. But the idea behind the day before is what made it so credible. And even with all of the red flags, which are basically a sea of red flags, the amount of red flags is something that Moses could have parted. But people, either genuinely or just to see what the end of this story was, were invested in this game to see what happened with it. Because the idea behind it is so good. Some would say too good to be true. And that's, yes, like this is like one of the most ambitious ideas I've ever seen in gaming on paper. But that's why it got to where it is. It's smart because it joins together a lot of communities that share common interests while giving each of those communities things that are specific to them. What I'm talking about is you had the social aspect of an MMO, and people who love MMOs might like them a lot for their systems, but a lot of people who love MMOs love them because of that community feeling, because of just being in a shared open world and everything that comes with it. It had the survival aspect that was very appealing to people who like survival games and crafting as well. And it had the extraction shooter exploration open world element of a zombie game, and also the PvP of a shooter. And that's just perfect, right? Like that's a pizza with all the toppings that everybody in the room wants for the first time in history. So of course people were going to pay attention when you sell that idea and you put out the fantastic visuals that they did. The visuals that we then saw broken down to be, let's say, very, very heavily inspired by other AAA projects, to the point that you could argue that they were either traced over or stolen, depending on how you like to use words. But if you just give people an idea that is that good, and you give them shiny graphics, people will become interested in your game. Even with all those red flags. And that makes sense. We all just want good games. Like, I believe it's in our nature to believe the best. And even if it looked like it would never come true, it was better to dream and to think, yes, this, what if it's actually just like terrible PR and marketing, but they're making a fantastic game. And I think that's the hope that people held on to. I would have loved, and I think most of the people, I mean, you can tell me if the idea of this game is that good to you, because it is to me, but I mean, guys, it was always going to be like this. And that's scary. Like, we're very human at heart. We're just going to be attracted to things that sound like they're going to be amazing. And if you put us enough pretty things in front of us, we're going to try and vouch for it and follow it. And you can get a game that is nothing like what it ended up being at the top of the Steam wishlist chart, and in the end present a subpar asset flip, even by asset flip standards. But you still had all of this potential. Like, this could have been a great game. This could have been amazing. All of the work necessary. The hardest part about being successful in games is getting your game into people's hands. And I just think it's so incredibly disappointing. It's almost insulting in a way. This game managed to be in everybody's eyes, right? It got in front of its audience. It had the audience ready to consume the game. And they made a terrible game, when there are so many great games that never find their audience and that gamers miss out on, because that is such a difficult part of making anything, not just games, right? If you make music or films or YouTube videos, getting them in front of people's eyes is the hardest part, because you can pour your heart and your soul into making a product, but if you didn't have a good plan beforehand of getting it into people's hands and bringing it to people's attention, it's all for naught. And these guys nailed the hardest part just to scam everyone. There's gonna be one heck of a story to be told here one day of what was actually going on, if it was always a scam, if it was always meant to be an asset flip. which that's where I'm betting, like the most elaborate, big scale, like our first AAA scam. Not because the product was AAA, like the scam was of AAA caliber. Right? They got their trailers on IGN, right? They got mainstream media coverage for a scam. Or maybe it was meant to be a game and it just fell through. It'll be a fascinating story that somebody will be able to tell someday. But aside from just musing on how that is the most difficult part of making games, and how the idea was so good and it should probably be done one day, maybe by somebody, because obviously there was an appetite for it. I hope it's a cautionary tale to people. I like to think that most people already knew where this story was headed, even when they bought the game. But if that isn't the case, I hope people learn that sometimes things are too good to be true. It's just how the world works. If it walks like it's too good to be true, and it talks like it's too good to be true, it might just be too good to be true. Also, refunds. One of the best things that we've ever received, like from a consumer standpoint. I'm glad that people had the opportunity to jump into this game, to immediately see it for what it was and return it, so that these guys didn't make any money off of it. That's such a valuable thing for a community to have, that opportunity to refund a game like this. Of course, that doesn't protect us. There are many games who have found ways around the refund policy and the timer, and that complicates things, because then it's not as black and white of like, I played less than 2 hours, get me my money back, because they'll put you in like weird queues, or the executable runs in weird ways, or they put a lot of stuff up front that might be convincing you to stay. The world of scam games is crazy. There's many creators. I know that I'm a tiny nothing of a creator, but if you're watching this and you haven't seen the videos from KiraTV, he's been there since the very start of this entire story and has covered so much of this side of the industry that I strongly recommend you go see them. It's a sad day for games. It's the saddest way to end one of the greatest years for gaming, but at least the scammers got what they deserved. So yeah, I've been Mugthief. I didn't know if I should make this video or if I'm uploading it, but one of the main things about my channel is that I don't want to just champion good games. I really want to call out when something is bad, and I'd rather have this video up here in retrospect and like know for myself that I didn't just let other people talk about it. I at least chimed in my 2 cents, because I think it's, if I'm taking this thing that I do seriously, I can't just be lazy and say like, well, already other people covered it. No, that's a bad work ethic. I should talk about the horrible things that happen when they happen, to give insight into them, and hopefully one day for them to serve as warnings to people. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you very soon.